So this is a talk about remote teamwork, how to thrive in the post office world, which is the world that we are in right now. So I'm Jessica Reeder. I am the All Remote Campaign Manager at GitLab. My job is focused on remote work specifically, and sharing information about remote work. So you probably already know this. GitLab is one of the world's largest all-remote organizations. So we have 1,300 team members who are across 65 countries and regions throughout the world. And we work with 100,000 different organizations. And beyond the full-time employees of GitLab, there are thousands of code contributors who use the product and contribute to it while they're building their own projects. So it's a big global effort that's constantly happening asynchronously. One of the things that drew me personally to GitLab is the company culture. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, actually quite a bit more later, but the leadership at GitLab has made a big investment in creating a strong functional remote culture, and that's really paid off. So these are just three of the ways that we were recognized in 2020 for essentially having happy employees. And I think that's important to recognize. Even before the pandemic, GitLab saw a need for organized thinking about the future of work. And so that's where I come in. My team exists at GitLab to understand remote work, to codify best practices, and to try to predict what the future is going to look like. So we've been very effective, especially led by Darren Murph, our head of remote. We have case studies and strategies that are now being taught at Harvard Business School, INSEAD, and other leading schools. Personally, I've been working remotely for 15 plus years. I joined GitLab in March of 2020, specifically so that I could work on remote work, because when I started, it really wasn't a career opportunity, and now it is. I would love to make the rest of my career focused on creating strong remote practices for companies that are doing a mix of different strategies and structures throughout the world. There's a lot of work to do, in March 2020 and February 2020, it really began in serious, because of course at that time there were a group of remote companies, and all of a sudden there were many remote companies. So hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people all around the world were suddenly learning how to work outside the office on a scale that had never been done in human history. So now we are a full year into this remote work experiment. And what we're hearing is that more and more companies are going to continue to work remotely in some form, maybe hybrid, maybe fully remote. We're hearing a global conversation about the future of work. So how much of our work is going to happen at the office? To put some framework around that, I want to give you some statistics. So this is before the pandemic. So in early 2020, all the way back to maybe 2017, 2015 even, GitLab and other organizations were trying to evangelize remote work. We wanted to convince people that it was the future. And so we did some studies. And so these are statistics for people who were working remotely generally at all remote companies. So 77% of people said that they are more productive. 86% of people believe that remote is the future of work, and 62% of people would have changed jobs if they were offered a job at an all-remote company versus one that is in person. Now, fast forward. Now we are well into the global remote work experiment, and we're seeing something else happening. And I think it's very important to recognize this. 70% of people reported that they're working the weekends. 69% of people are burning out, and 63% of people are discouraged from taking time off. I just want to let these sink in a little bit, because this is really unfortunate, but this is where we're at right now. We have 70% of people around the world who are burning out, and that is unsustainable. That's not how we want to continue. So if you are feeling like this, I want you to know that you are definitely not alone. It's happening everywhere. The reason for this is obvious. This is not really well-planned remote work. This was crisis-induced working remotely. Most companies didn't have time to execute a remote transition strategy. So we've been in crisis mode, and we cannot do that forever. I want to give you the other side of things. So like I said, GitLab has been an all remote company for a long time, and I feel that it has a very strong remote culture. So I wanted to just document my day for you. So this is Monday. So I worked from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's generally my hours, sometimes 9 to 5, whatever needs to be done. Had 30 Slack messages, which is a little busy for me. 4 meetings. So since it was Monday, I had my manager meeting, our one-on-one, and we just connect about everything coming up in the week. Then I met with a partner on a project that we're doing. Then I had a coffee chat, which I'm going to mention again later. Coffee chat is a 30-minute chat with anyone on the team just to socialize and connect as people and not talk about work. And then I had a team sync, and I want to let you know that this was an optional team sync. This is important. So the meeting was completely recorded. The slide deck was distributed ahead of time. And so I had the option to attend or not, and I decided not to attend, and I watched the video later. So just dropping a little seed there about what meetings are going to look like as we talk through this. We work in GitLab, so I had 15 open issues, kind of a lot, 5 different documents I was contributing to, only 3 emails. I'm quite proud of that. And a long walk, and of course, all of this in my own home. So when an organization has a mature remote culture and strategy, it can be a very positive experience. It can be a very normal work day. So I want to actually give you a little bit of structure, a little bit of theory to think about remote teams. You are somewhere on this continuum. Every team is, right? So at GitLab, these are our 5 main categories of remote team structures that we've identified. There are actually 10 that we have named, but these are the 5 big ones. And the no remote and all remote are the easiest to understand. So no remote means that nobody is working remotely. Everyone's in the office. All remote means that everyone is remote. Where it gets interesting is in the middle. So you're somewhere probably in one of these right now. Remote allowed means that most people are in the office most of the time, but some people are working remotely some of the time. Remote first means that most people are working remotely most of the time. Some people are in the office some of the time. And then in the middle, we have hybrid remote. This is the most common structure that we are seeing pop up, and for good reason. It makes sense theoretically, it makes sense financially for companies. What it is that you have a group of people who are in the office basically all of the time. They primarily commute to work and they work in the office. And then you have a group of people who are remote most of the time. So they work remotely primarily, and generally those 2 groups have completely different work experiments. And that makes it challenging. That is one of the biggest challenges that teams will have to solve in the upcoming years. We're heading into a time when companies are going to experiment with hybrid remote structures. And those of us who are in those teams are going to have to solve some challenges to make sure that we have a good experience. That's what I'm talking about today. So I want you to recognize that remote is always transitional. So you may start at one place on the team structures that I just showed you, and you may end up in a different place. Many of us started in 2020 with one type of team, and now in 2021, we have a very different attitude and very different experience of remote work. And what's going to happen by the end of this year? We don't know. Even for an all-remote company like GitLab, we're constantly learning, constantly iterating. This is a new field, and it's a new way of working. So we're learning by doing, and your team will also learn by doing. What I'm hoping that you'll get out of this talk is a few strategies, a few tips that you can take back to your team. So I know that we have a mixed group here. We have some people who are individual contributors. We have some managers. And I'm going to offer a range of different suggestions, strategies, tips that you may be able to use. And I hope that you'll just screen cap the slides and take notes and find 1 or 2 things that you can take back to your team and attempt to implement. That's my goal for today, and I hope we accomplish it. So let's start with meetings. If there is one thing that people ask me about in every talk and in every consultation, it's meetings. And there's a very good reason for that. I think for most of us, as soon as we went from in-person work to remote work, probably the first thing that you experienced was that your calendar filled up with meetings. And that's what happens when you work remotely. You sort of want to just copy and paste the old way of working. So if you have a question for someone, you need to discuss something, you say, hey, let's jump on a call. Let's have a meeting. But the problem is that we just end up having too many of them. They grow and they take up our whole calendar. And then there's no time to get your work done, which then leads to you working longer hours. So why? I think there's a couple of reasons. First of all, we're humans. We like to talk to each other. We're social. We like to communicate face to face. And so when we have something to discuss and we're not sure exactly how to do it, we call a meeting so that we can work through it together as humans in a social environment. Of course, that multiplies quickly and suddenly it is no longer productive at all. And then second, I think that we call meetings because we don't know how, or else we don't trust that we can solve problems asynchronously. Sometimes that's really valid. So if you need to brainstorm something, or if you have to have a difficult conversation, it's much easier to have it in a meeting. But most of the time, we're just defaulting to our old habits. So I want to encourage you to do something. This actually happened to me this week. Somebody messaged me and said, hey, are you available at 3:30 to talk about this urgent problem? And 3:30, that was the middle of my focus time. And so I said, do we have to talk synchronously? Can we resolve this asynchronously? And we were able to. So we put the meeting on the calendar as tentative, and then we attempted to work it out in a document, and in the end, the meeting was canceled. That's the biggest thing that you can try to do. Say, hey, can we talk about this asynchronously instead? Then at GitLab, we have a little rule, which is that every meeting needs to have an agenda. So when the meeting is scheduled, there should be a document that goes with it that says exactly what's going to happen in the meeting. If you get an invite for a meeting and it doesn't have an agenda, at GitLab, you are allowed to say no, thank you, because every meeting is required to have an agenda. And so we think of it this way. Is it more rude to skip a meeting that is not relevant to you? Or is it more rude to invite people to a meeting that is not relevant to them? We think it's the latter. We think that it is less considerate of people's time to call a meeting without them knowing what's going to happen, if it's important to them, and how long it will take to discuss the issues at hand. Also, if you do find yourself in a meeting where it's maybe not relevant to you at that moment, but you still want to stick around, we consider it fine for you to look away and go work on something else for a moment. And this happens sometimes, that someone will be called on in a meeting and they say, oh, sorry, can you repeat that? I wasn't paying attention. And that's okay. That's allowed. And it's a real rethinking. Can you imagine? There are many company cultures where that would not be acceptable at all. So we think that meetings are something that we can just continue doing the same way, but I want to let you know and suggest to you that it requires a complete rethinking and reimagination of every element around meeting culture. And if there's one thing that you can try with your team right now, it's rethinking how you do meetings. Easiest way to do that is actually to have stronger documentation. So most companies that we talk to, they have a project management system, there's a chat tool, communications procedures, document library, digital asset library, etc., but you don't have a centrally located, up-to-date handbook. GitLab is the opposite. We have an extremely large handbook that's actually available online transparently. Feel free to Google GitLab handbook and check it out. It would be probably over 10,000 pages if it was printed, and it's updated constantly by the entire team. Now, you don't have to get from where you are now to there, but I will say that having a strong handbook and a single source of truth is really essential for efficient operation asynchronously. So when you're in an office, if you have a question, you either call someone, schedule a meeting, or you just pop by their cubicle, their desk, and you say, hey, I have a question, and you just answer it quickly. That doesn't really work asynchronously. Whether people are on different time zones or they're just not at their desk, every question that you have becomes a delay. And this slows down the course of work to the point where you're not really able to function without working synchronously. So in order to work asynchronously, you need to be able to look up the information on your own. And the only way for that to work is with documentation. So think about how you can start now with just documenting a few processes. Next time someone sends you a question, if the information isn't documented somewhere, when you answer it, copy and paste your answer and document it somewhere. And that's how you start. Just start small and start building and start documenting things now. And you will eventually end up with a resource that's hugely valuable and saves a ton of time for your team. Now, one of the hardest habits to break is this one. Doing work in your chat tool. It's incredibly tempting to work in your chat tool, but your chat tool is for chat. It is not really designed for work. It's not a project management system. It isn't documentation. It doesn't really have a great search function. And that's partly because we don't really chat in the same way that we document. So make sure that you consider whether you're really doing the right thing when you are doing your work in your chat tool. And I have to say, I do this all the time. I am very guilty of doing work in the chat tool, and I have to be reminded to move things over to project management. So it's hard to do. But one thing that we have at GitLab is a forcing function. We have set up our Slack so that it automatically expires all messages after 90 days. And what that means is if you're talking about something important, you know in your mind that it will not be preserved if you talk about it solely on Slack. So when something important happens, the conversation moves over to the project issue or to the document so that it is being documented in a place that will last. This doesn't mean that you can't mention work things in your chat tool. Of course, you can talk about work in your chat tool, but make sure that meaningful discussions and things that need to be saved are happening elsewhere. And so I want to also remind you that chat is a gift. It is an opportunity for us to be people with each other. If we're only talking about work, then we lose the chance to connect as people. If you think of your chat tool as a place to be human with your coworkers, it becomes a lot more fun. Building trust and community is something that has to happen at every level of the company. So one thing that we hear a lot when we talk to companies is, how do we know when we transition to remote, how do we know when our employees are working? How do we know when our employees are working? And usually to that, I'm going to ask, why do you want to know when they're working? Well, because we want to know that the work is getting done. Well, then why don't you just measure whether the work is getting done and leave your employees alone? Don't monitor employees. If you find that your employer seems to be monitoring you too much, micromanaging you, then feel free to push back. There's a lot of good research that recommends that employers not micromanage and not monitor people on the job. Instead, measure results instead of attendance, because that's what really matters. It's what you're doing. Are you reaching the goals that are set out for you? Not whether you're at your desk every day, not whether you are taking long breaks. None of that really matters. Once you remove the feeling that you have to be present at work and always focused on work all the time, you create space for people to be people at work. You create space for informal communication. So one thing that I want to encourage people to do is be intentional about informal communication. This photo at the top left, that's Sid Randy, as you probably saw at the start of today. That's the CEO of GitLab. And I have no idea what's happening in this photo, but it's a relatively normal sight for us to see at GitLab. We intentionally create opportunities for informal communication. And we encourage people to be open and be expressive and be their full selves at work, because ultimately you want to know the people that you work with. And if you don't, you start to get lonely. So there was a question earlier about loneliness. That is one of the biggest risks of remote work, is feeling lonely, because truly we're alone. I'm alone right now. I'm all alone, speaking to a computer. How about you? It can get very lonely if we don't create opportunities to connect with each other, to be our full selves, to be people. So it has to be part of your day-to-day that you just make time to be friends with the people that you work with. Here are a few ideas. These are just a few of the things that we do. You might want to just screen capture this slide and try some of these. So coffee chats, as I mentioned before, you can schedule a chat with anyone to just talk to them for 30 minutes about anything but work. Talent shows, show and tell, a DJ room where someone's playing music and people are co-working, AMAs, pizza parties, trivias, bring your children and introduce them to each other on a Zoom call, scavenger hunts, whatever you can really think of to intentionally create opportunities for informal communication. And then meet in person too. If you have the opportunity to do so, try to meet in person. I have this photo here. It's actually a bit of a sad image for me because I started in March of 2020 at GitLab, and I was very excited to go to the company retreat, which was going to be in Prague. But of course, it was canceled due to the pandemic. I knew, though, that there would be another one. I knew that in maybe 9 months or so, there would be another opportunity, and for it happened that way. There will be another GitLab gathering sometime later this year, we hope. So make sure that you're also creating opportunities for people to meet in person. So remote leadership is interesting. First of all, I want to also show you this photo, which I love this photo. So this is a photo of our Chief Marketing Officer, Todd Barr. And as you can see, he's wearing a formal blazer from the waist up. And then from the waist down, he's in shorts and he's on his treadmill walking the dog. And I want to outline that for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is a leader. This is an executive who's showing his real life in remote work. Executive sponsorship of remote culture is essential, but it also needs to be something that involves people throughout the organization. So establish a team for remote culture. And this is something you can suggest, you can do, you can take back to your team right away. Anyone who's passionate about making remote work better at your organization can be part of this strike team. And all you need to do is start with one problem and suggest a solution to it. It's quite easy. It is a long process, but you can start small and you can work iteratively to change your company culture just a little bit at a time. And you can work as a team to do that. As you move into all of this, as we move back into the office, into these hybrid structures that are ahead of us, remember that it's going to be transitional. It's going to be experimental, and there will be challenges. And I think that it's very important for all of us to recognize that. Even the people who are leading the company and who are setting things up, they're hopefully doing their best with the very best intentions, but they will not do things perfectly. We need to all, as much as we can, be transparent and open with each other, try to build trust, try to build understanding, because it will be challenging, but the outcome will be so worth the challenges. If you find yourself in a place where you're not sure what to do, go back to your company credo, your mission statement, your values, your culture, whatever it is that brought you to the company that you're at in the first place. Rely on your company values to guide you to the right decision. So these are GitLab's values: collaboration, results, efficiency. The next one is actually diversity, inclusion, and belonging, iteration, and transparency. These are our values, and your company may have its own version of this. What are values exactly? They are a system of shared ideas. They help us know how to act in a given situation. So in other words, our values create our behaviors because we use these ideas to help us decide what to do. Ultimately, the behaviors that you choose add up to trends across your company, and that in that way, values support business strategies. So When you're going through a challenge in a remote transition, you find yourself unsure of what to do or how to move forward, go back to the ideals that your company is based on. What would the best choice look like based on the values that your team shares? How can we act in a way that moves everyone toward the outcome that we all want to achieve? And how can you make suggestions for things to work better based on the system of values that exists already in your company? Whether you're working remotely or in an office, it doesn't matter. Learning how to work remotely is just logistics. Understanding the impact of your work, making sure that it brings something positive to the world, that is living by your values. And ultimately, that's what matters. So if you find yourself in a difficult position, don't worry, rely on your team and you will find the answer. Of course, we have a couple of additional resources to help you with that so that you're not fully alone. So please help yourself to this document. So this is the Remote Playbook by GitLab. You can Google it right now. I want to say that probably about 100,000 people have downloaded this so far. It codifies a lot of our best practices for remote based on running this all remote organization across many years. So please help yourself to it. It's absolutely free to download. And I hope that it will add to what I've covered today and give you some more tips and strategies that you can try to use. Also, if you're at the manager level, we have a course on Coursera. Again, this is offered free to all learners. It takes about 10 hours and it will guide you through transitioning a team to remote best practices. It covers a lot of the ideas that I've just explained, and it goes into a lot more depth as well with some exercises so that you can try to apply it and ultimately build your own remote transition plan. And finally, if you have more questions, I've saved a couple of minutes now where I would love to answer them. And then you can also reach out to me on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and I would love to talk to you some more. So I hope that this has been helpful to you all, but I'd love to take just a moment. If you have questions and you'd like to drop them in the chat, I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a moment here, and I'll see if there are any questions.